Hello everyone, I am Barbaros. Welcome back to the channel. Today I am joined by a very special guest from Los Angeles, California, Nick Ferrell, also known as Fuzzfang, a multidisciplinary creative, editor, illustrator, and producer working across film, television, and internet content. He is best known for his work as an editor on the hit Netflix series The Toys That Made Us and The Movies That Made Us. Nick and I first connected back in 2023 on Instagram, and since then we have been exchanging ideas about the state of the film industry, post-production tools, and of course our shared passion for toys and collecting. I have been really looking forward to this conversation. Hello Nick,
Hello,
welcome.
Barbara.
It's
How
great
are
to
you?
have
Thank you for
you.
having
Fine. Thank you for accepting my invitation. How are you?
me. Fantastic. It's a beautiful 70-degree day here in Los Angeles.
Nick, first tell me about your nickname, Fuzzfang. Where does it come from and what does it really mean? Because I don't know what it means.
It's funny how I landed on Fuzzfang. My Instagram handle used to be The Bad Beard. I have a beard. At the time, my beard was rather long and shaggy. I decided to get rid of the name The Bad Beard because if you Google search that, a lot of beard care products came up and it was just really confusing and weird. And I decided to get rid of it. And I had already devised a brand, a logo branding for my whatever you want to call my personal branding, I guess, that was kind of tied in with Bad Beard. And I really liked it. It was just visually pleasing graphic for me. It's still my profile avatar on my Instagram. So I said, well, if I'm going to change my handle, I don't want to get rid of my my logo graphic. So I need to come up with a new name that is different, but could still conceivably work with that graphic, which was like a bearded skull graphic. Essentially, I came up with Fuzzfang because it evoked a beard. It was unique. I like alliteration. I wish I could say there was something deeper and more meaningful in the name, but aside from the fact that I'm hairy and bearded and I like dogs, it just kind of that's where I landed at. So, and it was like, and I've over the years I've changed my social media handles so many times, and I told myself, this is it. You're not gonna, whatever you pick now is it. You're stuck with this forever. Like, you're not going to change it anymore. So yeah, that's where I landed at with Fuzzfang.
Great, because I thought it was probably a character, like a 1980s sci-fi comic book,
I
supporting
mean, it could
characters.
be. Sounds like something, and that that obviously that aligns with a lot of my interests. So it just felt like it worked. It clicked.
I would like to talk to you about your career, your story. How did you eventually become an editor on big shows and major productions? How did you begin your career?
I kind of have a 1.0 and a 2.0 origin story working in television and film. My 1.0 was when I got my first real job in television as a production assistant. And I kind of, at the time, I was enrolled in an associate's degree program at a community college here in Southern California at a school called Mount San Antonio College. And they had a very strong broadcast department, television, film, and radio technology department. My original plan was to finish my associate's degree and then transfer to a 4-year bachelor's program somewhere here at a college somewhere here in the LA area. But before I could do that, one of my fellow students who had since graduated and moved on had gotten an internship, which then became a production assistant job on the show Friends. And then when Friends ended, she was promoted to the assistant of the line producer on the show Joey, which was the spinoff of Friends. And they needed interns to help. They just needed extra help because it was the week. They were gearing up to shoot the pilot episode. Through her, I won't get into all the details, it's boring and lags, but through her, I got a job as an intern on the pilot of Joey. And I worked for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, the line producer was so impressed with me that he said, the show's already picked up. We're going to series. It's just the pilot is a technicality, but the show's going. And he's like, we're going to come back in 2 months in the summer to start season 1. I'd like to hire you as a production assistant. So I started in season 1 of Joey as a production assistant. By season 2, I had moved up to post-production coordinator. By the end of the season, I became post-production supervisor, and I was kind of running post. It's weird how that happened, but then the show was canceled. And like they say, the only thing harder to get than your first job in the business is your second job. And I kind of had a stagnant period. And a lot of the people who I had worked for on that show, by the time Joey ended, they had been working nonstop because they had worked all through Friends. Then they jumped to Joey. And a lot of those producers took breaks and they weren't doing shows for a minute and they weren't hiring. And they were like, well, I'll call you in a year or two. And I'm like, well, I need to get a job now. And I had a really weird stagnant period. And then I had kind of a crisis of faith. And I decided to get out of the entertainment industry because I wasn't finding the type of job I wanted. Because the work I was doing in post-production on Joey was more on the administrative side. I was scheduling and I was filing the production orders and I was paying the vendors and overseeing mix sessions. But I wanted to get into the edit bay. So I tried to get assistant editor jobs and I didn't have any like professional experience as an assistant editor. I'd worked in lower levels of that kind of stuff, but nowhere on the level of like professional TV. So I had a crisis of faith because it wasn't happening. I was going on submitting my applications and resume, and I was going on interviews and wasn't working. And I actually took a year off and I went and I worked. I worked in the clothing industry. I worked for a clothing company doing t-shirt graphics. I did that for a year. At that point, this was right around the time of 2008 when we hit the Great Recession here in the United States. And there was a big economic downturn and the clothing industry was hit hard. And a lot of clothing companies were going under or they were laying people off. And the company I worked for was really feeling it. And they were, every few weeks, somebody was getting laid off at this company. And I just knew. I was the lowest guy on the totem pole in the art department. And I knew eventually I was going to get the axe. But by some fluke, a friend of mine who was an assistant editor on a show said, I can get you in over here as the night assistant editor. And I said, well, I've been trying to get night assistant editor jobs for the past year and a half, and I can't get one. Like, they're not going to hire me, just like no one else will hire me. He goes, we'll lie. We'll lie, and we'll say you worked with me on this other job, and my friend who was the post-production supervisor on that job will vouch for you and say he worked on the show with me, and you worked under him. And after like a year of him telling me you should lie on your resume, and I didn't want to lie, I finally caved and said, fine, I'll lie. So we lied, and I got my first assistant editor job on that show. And from there, it really was like, I knew that's where I was supposed to be. I like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then it was just, I jumped from job to job, and I was only an assistant editor for a year and a half before I got my first, before a show, executive producer on a show I was working on called Wipeout, which was a show on ABC, a big comedy reality competition show. They took a chance on me and offered me a editing position on that show. I've been cutting ever since. So it was a very unorthodox, strange, uneven back and forth path to where I didn't finish school. I just started working. And once I started working, that was it. If anything, I saved a lot of money on student loans, because I have friends who do the exact same thing that I do. We both have the same job. In many cases, I have a higher title than they do, and they have thousands of student loan debt, and I don't. So as nervous as I was about it, and for as nervous as like my family and my parents were, I think it worked out. I just followed my gut and it worked out. So
that's the film business. Everybody has a unique story how to navigate this highly competitive and difficult industry, and we arrive somewhere and we do what we can. So I would like to move on to the show that is really, really famous, especially in Turkey, among our Turkish audiences, The Toys That Made Us. When it was first aired, I remember it was very, very popular because we have many, many toy enthusiasts and cinephiles as well. One of the standout episodes which I saw last night again is the Star Wars one, is the first episode which you cut.
I was one of the editors who worked on that episode. That's the thing with that show. It was very much a collaborative process. It was primarily me and another editor by the name of Ben Frost, who was credited as the executive producer, but he was actually editing it. He had experience as leadership roles on previous shows. At that time, I did not. And when we came into that show, the Nacelle company was brand new. The Toys That Made Us was the first production that the Nacelle company, the parent company or the subsidiary married to the Nacelle company, had produced some things before. But Nacelle was a newly incorporated entity. There was a lot of learning curve at the company. because Ben and I were just two guys who kind of came in freelance, who'd been working as editors for many years. But the company itself hadn't been producing that type of content before. So there was a lot of learning curve. And when we came in, it was obvious that we were missing certain positions and roles within the workflow. Ben came in and undertook more of a leadership position. I came in as kind of like his right-hand guy. And together, we put that show together. 2017, when we started post-production on that show. And that show, that was a dream come true. I mean, that was the type of show that I had always hoped I would get to work on one day. It's a subject matter that I'm particularly interested in. I am a toy collector, and I have a lot of interest in that era. And I also, I'm not just a toy collector. I'm also like an enthusiast for the history and the personalities involved in that stuff. And so to get to work on a show like that was kind of crazy. And I remember seeing online somewhere when they first started their social media account, before anybody even knew what the show was, it was kind of getting a boost amongst the social circles of toy collector people online. So I was seeing on various blogs or on various social media accounts, people were talking about this show, because they had done like one social media post on their brand new account saying like, we're making this show. And I still remember it was just a picture of the 3x5 flashcards for all the episodes on a corkboard, but they were all blurred out, so you couldn't see what anything said. And everybody was like, ooh, what's this show going to be? What's this show going to be? And I remember seeing that online, and I was like, oh my God, I would love to work on that. This is like my dream. I was born for this. I should do this show. And I started asking people I knew, do you guys know anything about this show? And I was like, no. Because at the time, the nacelle company was brand new. They had no real history. No one had worked with it. No one even knew who this company was. So it was like dead end. And I didn't even know at that time how to get a hold of this company. I didn't know how to. Then one day, out of the blue, I'm walking my dog. My cell phone rings. I pick it up. A producer who I had worked with in the past on other productions. He goes, hey, man, what are you doing right now? What's your availability? And I said, well, I'm working on this one show, and I just literally yesterday agreed to book this other show that starts in a few weeks. And he goes, oh, man, that's too bad. He goes, I was calling to see if I could bring you in to interview for this documentary show I'm doing on Netflix. And as soon as he said that, man, it sure would be cool if he's working on that toy show. And I go, well, what is it? He goes, it's about toys. And I go, you're kidding me. I go, is it the toys that made us? And he goes, yeah. And I go, dude, when do you want me to come in for the interview? He's like, can you come in tomorrow? I was like, I'll be there. So I came in and I met. I mean, it's so bizarre. Like, it was like almost like divine intervention that this job just landed on my lap. And both Ben and I had just worked together on another show. So we already knew each other. We were friends from working on another show. And we both came in, we both interviewed separately, but with the same executive producer on the show. And we both got the job. I had to go to that other job I had booked and told them, I'm sorry, I can't take this. There's something else that's frankly better. And, I had to make that call. I normally don't like to do that when I book a gig. I usually like to keep my word. But this was just too amazing to pass up. And yeah, I mean, really, in a lot of ways, the Toys That Made Us really marks a major demarcation in my career. There's before Toys That Made Us, and there's after Toys That Made Us. I had not done a lot of documentary content at that point. I had mostly done more unscripted reality shows. So coming onto Toys That Made Us was like a whole new stage in my career. And I really had to kind of buckle down and rewire my brain, because editing a documentary is a very different process from editing a reality show. Whereas with a reality show, you play fast and loose with reality, because for as much as we call it unscripted, it's a lot more scripted than you think it is. Whereas you're working on a documentary, you're now trading in facts. You can't play fast and loose with the facts. You have to be factual, and you have to tell the truth, and you have to take great care to make sure that what we're putting on screen is what happened and how it happened and who it happened to. And so there's a lot of discipline that came in, that whereas before you weren't kind of beholden to that type of stuff with the more reality TV based stuff. So that was really exciting. because for me, that was always the end game, was to get more into documentary. It's a format that I enjoy. And it's frankly, it's more interesting really than a lot of reality shows are. Some I've worked on have been great. Others are whatever, they're a paycheck. But getting into docs was always the end game for me. So this was like a really big deal. And then to do the show, and it's about a subject matter that I actually had personal interest in, made it even better. Not only that, was when Ben and I came in on this show, there was kind of like a basic idea, an outline for what they wanted the show to be. But in terms of like the style and the execution and the tone and the personality of the show, that wasn't really all decided. That all kind of organically came out of Ben and I as we were putting it together, and then working with the executive producer and CEO of Nacelle, Brian Volkweiss. We kind of, this style and personality coagulated as we worked on the show. So it was really like, there's a lot of all the shows I've worked on, Toys has a lot of my personal authorship married to it. There's not a lot of shows where I can say, if I wasn't on that show, it would have been different. But on that, I can say that about that show. And that was really nice. Whereas most shows, it's like, whether I worked on this or not, it probably would have basically still been this thing that it ended up being. But we were able to we were given the reins in a way that most editors don't get the reins on a show. So that was very exciting, because it was like, when it was all said and done, it was like, we made this. Like, we made this. If we weren't here, this would have been a very different show. So that was pretty cool, like, to be able to have that experience. And also, it's a testament to Brian, the owner of the company. He trusted us, and he liked our instincts, and he liked what we brought to the table. And to his credit, he was like, I like what you guys are doing. And I've never had somebody give me that much trust and allow me to do so much. That was the first time anything like that had ever happened. So yeah, a really, really positive experience in my career.
By looking at your Instagram profile, I can see that the show has some relation with you, because it has the same signature. Your Instagram style, your posts, the way the colors and the design, the graphic design in your Instagram profile has some similarities with the show.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And I can't take credit for all of that, because we had graphic designers and animators who built graphics and animations, mm-hmm. But then I also built graphics and animations for the show. But like, for as much as I'd like to say, like, I designed all that for the show, that's not the case. But mm-hmm. I did contribute a lot to that show. So that one always kind of feels like, in a lot of ways, compared to other shows I've worked on, that one always kind of like has a special place in my heart. That one feels like one of my babies. Like, I'm very protective of that show, because like I said, like, we were allowed to have an authorship of that show that you don't often get cleared to take. And it shows. It was a perfect storm, because had the company been more established and experienced and entrenched in their ways, that probably would not have happened. But because things were so new and fresh there, and everything was kind of loose, and the workflows and everybody's roles at the company and who was responsible, that was all kind of like solidifying. And it was much looser, and just kind of like, well, what do you want to do? How do you think we should do this? It was a very unique experience. In addition to that, this was the infancy of Netflix producing its own unscripted content. Don't hold me to this, but I think I've heard Brian say that we were the first Netflix internally produced unscripted show ever. And because of that, there was a whole, like, nobody at Netflix really knew what the rules were. I always maintain that show got made the way it got made. Well, first of all, the fact that it even got made at all. And second, the style in which we were allowed to make it, that could have only happened when it happened. If the Toys That Made Us was greenlit today, it would have ended up being a drastically different show. I can say that with 100% certainty. It was very much a perfect storm of conditions and factors that aligned to allow us to make that show when we did and how we did.
So you also edited multiple episodes of The Movies That Made Us, another
yes.
fan favorite among cinephiles. I checked your IMDb, and you worked on 12 episodes, including iconic ones like Jurassic Park, RoboCop, and aliens. What was it like working on this series? Was it different from the Toys That Made Us? Was it the same approach in terms of your creative process?
Very similar in that the tone and the style was maybe not exactly the same, but very close. Also, another situation where we were kind of allowed to really have a lot of authorship, and we were really allowed to kind of let our creative wings spread on that show as well. One thing I would say that's different is that the stories take on kind of a different tone and tenor because you're dealing with bigger personalities generally when you're telling stories about film and Hollywood, whereas
a lot of egos, maybe.
I mean, and here's the thing. That's not to say that there aren't some gigantic egos in the toy industry, too. If you watch the Toys That Made It, you can probably guess who some of those characters were. You're telling very different stories. You're also coming at it from this place where the audience most of the audience knows who, maybe not all, but they know who many of the characters are in the story. Like, they're going to know who Bruce Willis is. You know, they know who Steven Spielberg is. They know who Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray are. Like, so you're coming at it. There's a different way to approach it in that you have a shorthand available to you because you're dealing with these personalities that most people already know. Whereas with Toys That Made Us, nobody knows who these people are. The Toys That Made Us is all about these unsung heroes who nobody never ever learned about. And it's this like, the Toys That Made Us is like this revelation of like, you know the toy, but you don't know you have no idea who's behind those toys. Whereas the movies that made us, the trick with that show is if you're going to make a show about Home Alone or Ghostbusters or Pretty Woman, you're telling these stories about these films that everybody knows about these movies. A lot of people have heard a lot of the famous stories about those, you know, because we're making these documentaries about films that have been around for 30, 40 years. And there have already been documentaries before the ones that we've made, whether they be like actual documentaries or they be bonus features on DVDs. And there's a lot of those, you know, with any film, there's the obligatory set of like anecdotes and stories that get told about those films over the years. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I've heard that story. Yeah. I know I know the story about blah, 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 blah. And it's like with movies that made us, our whole trick was how do we find those little stories and anecdotes that really haven't gotten a lot of lip service over the years? How do we find what are the little stories and anecdotes that slip through the cracks all these years that no one ever heard about? I think one of the charms of that show is we took what some would view as a handicap, which is while we were able to get a lot of big above the line names for that show, we couldn't always get everybody that we wanted. Some would see that as a handicap, but how we turn that into our strength is when you interview the production designer or you interview the stunt coordinator, well, those guys have been interviewed exponentially less over the years than, say, the directors or the producers or the stars. And by default, those guys have stories that no one's ever heard because nobody ever asked them. They weren't getting interviewed enough to tell those stories. The thing about movies that made us is I always feel like it's like maybe they don't all stand as like the definitive accounts of those films, but they're like, I view them as like the next one down because you get all the big headline, big stories from like bigger funded documentaries. But then from ours, you get a lot of those stories that no one else ever tells because we talk to the people that everybody else who have the bigger budgets and have access to the bigger above the line names. They don't want to talk to those guys. And we're like, well, we'll talk to them. Because if you've ever worked on a film, everybody all the way up and down the ladder has great stories about working on whatever that project was. And just because you're maybe not the name on the marquee doesn't mean you didn't see some crazy stuff. Doesn't mean you weren't involved in some zany situations. So that's what I always thought was so great about the movies that made us. It's not like the main head-on view of the film. It's like a step to the left at a 45-degree angle, and you catch these things that you didn't hear anywhere else before. So that was kind of the big difference. Toys That Made Us is like, we're going to just tell you the story straight on, here's what happened. Movies was like, you probably know what happened, so now we have to kind of tell it from a slightly different perspective. If I had to break it down, it's like what the main difference between those two shows was.
Both are great shows. I have watched them many times. Very entertaining, fast-paced. If you love movies, if you love the history of movies like Jurassic Park, Alien, who doesn't want to know how creatures, production design, the set design, how they were built. It's a great series in terms of anyone who is interested in movies and Hollywood. So I would like to move on to the state of the film industry now, Nick. Since you are working nonstop, I can say, Hollywood, maybe I can say that.
Yeah, you could say that.
You're a full-time editor, working on a series for big platforms like Netflix. And today there is a lot of discussion around AI's impact on the film industry, especially in editing, post-production, and visual effects world. How do you see your job evolving in this new, landscape? And going forward, do you have any concerns about how this might affect, our work and the industry more broadly?
It's definitely going to affect, it already is affecting the number of jobs available. As the technology advances and can do things that people can do, I mean, obviously it's a no-brainer that's going to affect people. I don't see AI wiping out editors anytime soon. I don't see that yet, at least. I do think there's a case to be made for editors to get comfortable embracing some of the technology. For example, something I already use regularly is AI voice generation. 11 Labs it has been embraced by post-production. It's here. It's done. It's a standard thing. I've now worked on multiple projects in the past 2 years where we have used 11 Labs. I worked on a feature documentary last year where we used 11 Labs. I worked on a show about a year ago, last winter. We used 11 Labs. The show I'm currently working on, we use 11 Labs.
Just one question. If you look at the press and if you look at what's out there in terms of news, you see that there is a backlash against using AI voice like 11 Labs. But you say that you are using it all the time. So that, you guys, I am sure everybody's okay with it. So what do you think about, in that sense, is the industry okay with it or?
Well, here's the thing. It's interesting. I will say that Netflix, for one, they are very leery of us using it. There's a lot of legal issues. There's a lot of concerns about putting words in people's mouths that they never said, which is why it comes down to you have to be very careful. As the old saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. Having a tool like that really empowers you to do a lot of things that you couldn't do before. Now, as an editor, you know what a Frankenbite is. Sometimes you take a soundbite and you chop the words up and you rearrange them and you make people say things they maybe didn't say exactly. Now, in reality TV, that's the bread and butter of reality TV. Frankenbiting to get people to say things that you need them to say that's an everyday thing in editing unscripted reality television. Because in reality TV, as I said, even though it's called reality TV, it is pretty scripted. So there's a lot of fakery. These people sign away. If anybody is in a reality show, you can make them say whatever you want. They sign that away when they sign up to be on these shows. Obviously, this comes back to what I was saying with the shift to documentaries. Now, when you're making a documentary, you are now beholden to making sure that you're presenting what people are saying as factual. Sometimes when you edit what somebody says, you're not doing it necessarily to make them say something that's not true. Maybe you're just chopping up their sentence for brevity. Maybe you just need them to say something faster or more concisely or more clearly. And sometimes you can effectively do that with just chopping up the dialogue and building a Frankenbite. And you can, instead of somebody saying something in a really long-winded way, you can have them say it far more concise. Sometimes you don't have the pieces to do that effectively, and it sounds choppy and weird and not convincing, and then you're stuck and you can't do it, and you need to come up with a different way to do it. Well, when you're using a technology like 11 Labs, you can now just feed that person in and then have them say that thing that they did say. You're not lying. You're not having them say something that didn't happen, or you're not putting words into their mouth to present them as saying something they never said. Maybe you're just tweaking it to have them say that same thing, just far more concisely and quickly, so you can get to the point faster. I agree with using technology like this for that type of stuff. It makes the editing process much easier. And as long as the interview subject is aware that that's a thing that's going to happen and they agree and they sign off to that, and as long as you are not presenting them as saying something that is unfactual or you're trying to portray them in some insidious way that they didn't actually portray themselves as, I think that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Where you get into a mess is if you start to use that technology to, this applies to now AI in general, any type of generative AI, be it audio or now, also we can't not talk about video. You can't ethically, you can't be making people do and say things that they didn't do or say. You can't make someone come off as being a certain way that they are not. That is not ethical. That is wrong. And that's the quandary, because who's policing this? Like, a lot of us are good, decent people, and we don't want to portray people in the wrong light, so we don't do it. But also, what's there to you can be held legally accountable too, So right now, that's what's kind of, everybody's afraid of getting sued. Honestly, that's kind of like, I feel like AI would be getting embraced a lot more than it is right now in our industry if it weren't for that. I think what you're going to see is when everybody figures out the legalities of all of this stuff, you're going to see a more wider implementation of it. But until then, we're kind of in this weird middle ground. Where I think it's going to make the biggest advances, at least in the short term, is visual effects. I think visual effects is definitely somewhere where I would say people who work in visual effects need to really think long and hard about how they see their career panning out in the immediate future. But again, there's legalities with that, because then there's concerns about, can you copyright this, whatever this content is that the AI cooks up? Are you allowed to copyright that? And a lot of the studios and production companies are leery of that because they don't want to get stuck making something that now they legally can't say they own, that can be pirated or reused, and then they're like stuck. That's really, as much as I would love to say there's some like grand moral and ethical arc that's keeping us together, it's really legality that's keeping things at bay for now. But so it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. But I do think that clearly the technology isn't going anywhere. It's not going away. I can't say I'm super thrilled about all of it. Some of it excites me, but not all of it does. But what do?
You will see.
Yeah, I mean, it's Wild West right now. We really don't know how a lot of this is going to suss out.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Nobody really knows.
Yeah.
And there's also like, some people say like, well, maybe they're overpromising with some of this technology, and it's really not as advanced as they want you to think, because they're just they don't want to tank their stock, so they got to keep this illusion going that there's that too. And so I think at the end of the day, where it all kind of, when the dust settles, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. Some of this stuff is vaporware. Some of it is not. And we just need to see like what ends up actually being viable technology and what is a pipe dream. I don't think it's going to be as bad as some people think, but I also don't think it's going to be as rosy either. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, and we just need to kind of see where it goes. But for me, I'm willing to adopt the technology where it makes sense to do it to help me do my job better. So I guess that's kind of at the end of the day what it settles on.
Yeah, and you say that as an editor, it's mostly sound that you are profiting from AI in your current work.
So far, yes. I know some people who have been employing it to create visual content, not for like content that like goes to screen. I know like a lot of people who work in development who are making pitch reels, because if you've ever edited a pitch reel, editing pitch reels, you're normally like poaching footage from wherever you can find it, and you're making this bootleg reel as just a proof of concept, as a tone piece to like, this is as like, it's like a video version of a mood board. I used to do a lot of sizzle and pitch reel stuff for development, and you just poach content wherever you can get it, and then you stitch this Frankenstein thing together using footage from other films, other TV shows, whatever. And I see like, for that kind of stuff, to be able to just do an AI thing where you type in like, I need a shot of this and I need a shot of that, and then you just kind of Frankenstein it all together. I know people that are using like Sora and all the video generative AI stuff a lot for that kind of stuff, and it's working great. And in that regard, that's kind of fine, because nobody's really losing work, because there's still an editor making a reel, and You're either doing that or you're ripping clips off of YouTube. So nobody's really being hurt in that process. And if anything, it makes the pitch reels better because you can make them more specific and focused to what you're actually pitching. If anything, that increases the likelihood that you'll sell the project you're pitching. You know, I only see that as kind of a net gain, really, for that type of stuff. But again, it comes down to that. The production companies and the streamers and the networks are like, hold off on that. We don't want you putting any AI content into the show because they still don't know how they can legally copyright that yet. So they don't want us. I'm always shocked at how conservative they're being on the shows. I keep expecting them to just say like, yeah, if it'll save us money, let's do it. We're not there yet. You'd be surprised at how conservative they're being with how much they want us to do with this stuff. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see how it is next year after. But
in Turkey, it's a bit the opposite of what you say. They are very, they want to use it and they want to really use it. But it's another conversation, another topic. Thank you very much for this lovely conversation. I think it's been great. But before we wrap up, I would like to get an advice for aspiring editors, filmmakers, creatives, who have listened to this conversation. What's really interests me about your career is that not only you are an editor, you are also a designer, an illustrator, you are a motion designer, you are a producer. Because once you have all these talents, even though you only edit, you can use your knowledge in graphic design, or you can use your knowledge in motion design, After Effects, and you can use these skills even though you only edit or you only produce. So I think it's very important. And going forward, that's going to be more important in this AI craziness. Having not only one skill, but having different skill sets. That's what gonna, I think, differ you from the crowd. What advice would you give them for aspiring editors, filmmakers, and creatives?
Don't get comfortable. Don't keep yourself pigeonholed in your role. Really get comfortable with producing content in general. It gives you a perspective that I've worked with people, they edit, they got into editing, they edit, they clock in, they edit, and when they clock out, that's it. They don't do anything else in that realm. Then they go off, they go sit on the couch and they watch TV. They don't have any extracurricular activities. They don't turn their passion into hobbies outside of the paycheck. I would say the best thing you can do is know how to work a camera, know how to shoot, know how to edit, know how to actually produce something from scratch, from beginning to finish, whether that be you have a YouTube channel and you make a show on YouTube, or you make short films and enter them in festivals. Don't just be the guy who's like, oh, well, I can edit, but I don't know how to do anything else. I can't stress that enough, especially now in this era when entertainment and content creation, it's changing so fast. And I really think that fortune is going to favor those who are able to be self-sufficient and work outside of their area of expertise. You don't need to be as good at everything as you are. For example, let's say you are an editor. You don't have to be as good at directing and lighting and shooting as you are at editing, but you need to be good enough that you could make something. You could write something, you could shoot it, you could edit it, and you could put it out in the world in some fashion. That is going to give you a leg up over your competition in such a drastic way. I cannot overestimate or overstate that enough. And it's going to actually it's going to not only make you more well-rounded in those other disciplines, but it's, in a weird way, it also makes you a better editor. So I just, to kind of touch on what you're saying with me being kind of multidisciplined, I try to infuse my other skill sets into my editing as much as I possibly can. And it's on a by project case. Obviously, Toys That Made Us was the type of show, and Movies That Made Us, those were the type of shows that allowed me to really pour in. There's a lot of my graphics and my illustrations and my animations that I put into those shows because that's the type of show that was waiting for that kind of stuff to be put into it. Other shows I work on, that's not always the case, but the fact remains that my skills and my willingness to do those things are always there. And so if you have your secondary interests and your secondary skill sets after whatever it is that you do primarily, always keep brushed up on those skills and always be ready and willing to offer them to whatever project you're working on. It just makes you better. It makes you more valuable. You're going to be the guy they think of or woman that they think of on the next job, because they're going to be like, oh, they did this, but they also did this and that. And it just made them so much more efficient at their job, and it made them easier. It had made the show go easier because we had them here. So it's all about being, multidisciplined if you can be. And if you are, don't let those secondary skills get rusty is the best. I always give that advice.
Thank you very much, Nick, for joining me. This was really nice and I had a great time. One last question. As fellow collectors, what are your favorite YouTube channels right now?
My favorite YouTube channels? Well, I guess if I'm going to be a little shameless, I'm going to promote my own YouTube channel, which is The Secret Compartment, which is on YouTube. That is a vintage toy centric show. It's exemplary of everything I was just talking about. It brings my skills of editing, of shooting, of animating, of graphics. It's all piled into the show. It's just as much animation and comedy as it is educational material. I always tell people, if you like Toys That Made Us, you'll love Secret Compartment. Secret Compartment is all the stuff that I couldn't do on Toys That Made Us, and I shoveled all those ideas aside and I made my own YouTube show. Other than that, I'm a big fan of, I really like also another show with the word secret in the title, but I like Secret Galaxy, Dan Larson, formerly Toy Galaxy. I like that show. I like a lot of the stuff that Michael French does on retro blasting. I like more of the stuff where it's produced and less like this format, but for toys. But there's one show that I do like that's like this format called Toy Anxiety. That's a good one where they talk about toys and collecting. There's a new show called The Fun Shop, which is a couple guys, Ronnie and Greg here in the LA area, do a show about collecting. That goes outside of just toys. It talks a lot about collecting in general. But yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of content on YouTube for collecting. That's for sure.
Thank you very much. For anyone watching, if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe. Let me know if you'd like to see more interviews with filmmakers. Thank you to Nick, and see you on the next one.
Thank you, Barbaros. This has been great.